Never believe in the Cinderella fairy tale. Because in real life, the prince doesn't choose Cinderella because the glass slipper fits perfectly. He chooses her because she has no family to protect her. That sentence echoed in my mind every time I looked at the crooked wedding photo hanging in my bedroom. It was the only photo we took rushed, with no guests, and absolutely no genuine smiles. I am Hazel Lane, 26 years old, and I am an orphan. 10 years ago, a bus with failing brakes on the icy roads of the Colorado Rockies took my parents away, leaving me entirely alone in this world. I grew up in the foster care system in Queens, New York, learning how to stay silent to survive, learning how to bow my head so I wouldn't be hated. I thought my life would forever drift aimlessly like that. That was until I met Harrison Sterling at the luxury boutique on Fifth Avenue, where I worked as a sales associate. Harrison was the heir to the Sterling textile empire. He appeared polished and courteous, buying a gift for his mother, but keeping his eyes glued to me. He said he loved my gentleness and obedience. But now I understand. What he truly loved was my blank background. No father, no mother, no safety net. I was the perfect prey, docile and with no one to call for help. The wedding took place 6 months later. There was no lavish reception at the Plaza Hotel, like the New York elite usually threw. Just a quick signing at the courthouse. Eleanor Sterling, Harrison's mother, strictly forbade inviting their business friends. She was afraid of the embarrassment. A rat that falls into a jar of rice should just lie still and enjoy it. Don't expect to climb high and show off. She said that straight to my face on my wedding night, and I believed her. I believed that my silence and endurance would earn me a real family. But before we continue the story of the greatest foolishness of my life, please check if you have subscribed to the channel, and let us know in the comments where you are watching this video from. Your support is my motivation to expose the true faces of these monsters in human skin. Life inside the multi-million-dollar estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, was nothing more than a gilded prison. I wasn't a daughter-in-law. I was a high-end, unpaid maid. Every morning, I had to wake up at 5 a.m. to prepare bone broth according to my mother-in-law's strict dietary regimen. I polished expensive antiques, ironed every crease out of my husband's dress shirts, and swallowed my tears every time Eleanor viciously mocked my gutter trash origins. Harrison gradually changed. He became cold, indifferent, and frequently came home late reeking of alcohol. But then, a few months ago, he suddenly became sweet to me again. The company is going through a rough patch. The feds and partners are squeezing us tight, babe. Harrison sighed, resting his head on my shoulder, looking exhausted. I need to temporarily move some assets out of our main portfolio to avoid the IRS seizing them. Help me out, okay? He pulled out a thick stack of documents. Land parcels in New Jersey, massive textile warehouses in Pennsylvania, all of them needed someone to hold the title. It's just in name only, Hazel. I trust you more than anyone in the world. You are my only family. Those words family broke me. I craved it so blindly. I took the pen and signed. I didn't read carefully. I didn't hesitate. Every signature I put down was another link in the golden cage, locking tighter around me. I thought I was sharing my husband's burden, building our future. I had no idea that those naive signatures were the very first blades I sharpened with my own hands, handing them over so they could press them against my throat. And the price to pay was coming. I thought signing those real estate transfer papers was the limit of my blindness. But I was wrong. They didn't just want my legal identity to cover up their bad debts or hide assets. They wanted much more than that. They literally wanted my life. Less than 2 months after I signed those papers, the Greenwich estate was cloaked in a fake, mournful atmosphere. Eleanor fell gravely ill with end-stage renal failure. During those days, I was in and out of Mount Sinai Hospital constantly, watching my mother-in-law, the Iron Lady who used to hurl insults at me without hesitation, now lying weakly, hooked up to a dialysis machine. The steady beep of the monitors became a haunting sound, signaling that her time was running out. The doctor shook his head, saying, "Her heart is too weak. Her body is rejecting multiple treatments. She only has weeks left if we don't get a kidney transplant immediately." And then, the theatrical display of filial piety began. That day, the hospital corridor was empty, smelling only of clinical, cold antiseptics. Harrison, my husband, suddenly dropped to his knees, right in front of me. He gripped the hem of my skirt, his shoulders shaking violently, tears streaming down his face. "Hazel, please save my mother. I'm useless. My blood type isn't compatible. I can't save her." I stood frozen, awkwardly looking at the man I called my husband, stripping away all his aristocratic pride to kneel. He looked up, his eyes piercing into my soul. "Your white blood cell markers are a miraculous match. The doctor said you're our only hope. Hazel. I know this is a cruel request. It's asking too much of you, but my mother is my everything. If you save her, my family will owe you our lives. My mom will treat you like her own flesh and blood. I swear it. Own flesh and blood." Those words were like a needle puncturing my fragile defensive shell. For an orphan who grew up in the foster care system, those words carried a sacred, heartbreakingly seductive weight. It was what I had craved for 16 years, an extravagant dream I thought I could never touch. I looked into the hospital room through the glass window. Eleanor lay there, pale and weak. For the first time, she didn't look at me with eyes as sharp as knives. She waved me over. When I timidly stepped to her bedside, she grabbed my hand. Her hand was freezing and dry, but it made my heart burn. "Hazel," she whispered, her weak voice completely different from her usual shrill tone. "I'm sorry. I was strict before because I wanted you to mature and take care of this family. Save me. We'll start over. You will be my real daughter, okay?" I cried. I cried out of self-pity, out of a delusional sense of happiness. I naively believed that illness had softened their hearts, that the boundary between rich and poor, the prejudice against my background, had finally been erased by family love. Harrison hugged my shoulders, whispering honeyed promises into my ear that would turn out to be bitter poison. "After Mom recovers from this, I'll take you to Europe for a month. We'll have the honeymoon I owe you. We'll start a brand new life." Any hesitation about physical pain, about losing a part of my body, was drowned out by my desperation for love. I nodded. The day before the surgery, Harrison brought in a thick stack of paperwork. He said it was mandatory administrative procedure, liability waivers, and voluntary donation consent forms. "It's just paperwork, babe. These premium hospitals are super meticulous," he urged, placing a pen in my hand. More papers, more tiny, endless lines of text. I skimmed over the dry medical jargon, my mind still soaring with visions of a happy family and a romantic European getaway. I signed page after page. I failed to carefully read a tiny clause buried in the middle of page 7. A clause drafted based on the national organ allocation laws, something I only later realized was a trap. In the event, the designated recipient is deemed medically unfit to receive the organ at the time of surgery, the donor consents to authorize the hospital to reallocate the organ to the next highest priority patient on the national UNOS waiting list to prevent wastage of the donated organ. They had calculated everything. They knew Eleanor couldn't receive the kidney. They knew, but they still let me sign. Why? I couldn't understand it then, but my intuition told me something was wrong when I saw Harrison carefully put the folder into his briefcase, the corner of his mouth twitching into a relieved smirk. Not the relief of a man about to save his mother, but of a scammer who just successfully closed a shady deal. The next morning, I lay on a gurney, being wheeled down the long, cavernous hallway leading to the operating room. The overhead lights flashed past my eyes like streaks of memory. It was cold, very cold. Harrison held my hand, walking beside me. He leaned down and kissed my forehead, a kiss as cold as his mother's hand the day before. "You're so brave," he said, his voice deep and warm. "I'll be waiting right outside these doors. When you wake up, the first person you see will be me. You've got this, wifey." I looked at him, trying to etch the face of the husband I trusted absolutely into my mind. I smiled, a weak smile but overflowing with hope. I trusted him. I trusted that promise of waiting. The heavy operating room doors clicked shut. The metallic clinking of surgical instruments rang out. The anesthesia mask was placed over my nose. Cold air filled my lungs, and my consciousness faded. The final image seared into my retina wasn't the blinding surgical lights, but Harrison's eyes right before the doors closed. Those eyes held no worry, no love. They were empty and ruthless. Darkness swallowed me, and I fell into a deep sleep, completely unaware that when I woke up, the world I knew would have entirely collapsed. I had traded a kidney to buy family love, but what I was about to receive was the most naked, bone-deep betrayal imaginable. When you wake up, the first person you see will be me. That promise was the last sound I carried into my sleep, and the very first lie that slapped me in the face when I opened my eyes. I didn't wake up in a 5-star VIP recovery suite with soft bedding, fresh flowers, and absolute quiet, like Harrison had painted for me. There was no quiet hum of central AC, no silk curtains blocking the harsh sun. What welcomed me was a yellowed, water-stained ceiling and a chaotic cacophony of noise like a broken-down flea market. The overpowering smell of cheap antiseptic mixed with the sour stench of sweat and cold cafeteria food assaulted my senses, making my stomach churn with nausea. I was crammed into a standard, low-income, 6-bed ward. Next to me, an elderly woman was groaning in pain. Opposite me, a heavily bandaged man was loudly arguing with his family about medical bills. The pain from the incision in my side hit me immediately a violent, excruciating, ultimate agony. I wanted to scream, but my throat was parched, burning like I had swallowed hot coals. I tried to shift my weight, and the pain spiked, forcing uncontrollable tears from my eyes. "Harrison. Mom," I gasped, my hand blindly reaching out for familiar warmth, but no one took my hand. The space beside my bed was empty and cold. No Harrison. No mother-in-law. No one. I managed to reach the call button attached to the bed rail. I pressed it once, twice. 10 minutes passed in apathetic silence. Only after I mashed it frantically in despair did a young nurse walk in, looking extremely annoyed. "Why are you pressing it so much? The pain meds wore off. You just have to deal with it. Everyone hurts after surgery," she snapped curtly, not even looking at my face, just adjusting my IV drip. "My husband? Where is Harrison?" I asked, my voice cracking with terror. "Where is my phone?" The nurse glanced at me, her eyes a mix of pity and disdain. "When they wheeled you out of recovery to here, there was no one waiting. Your family took all your personal belongings and your phone. Just rest." She walked out, leaving me alone with my agony and sheer panic. The first day passed in a haze of delirium and bone-deep pain. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe Mom had complications after the transplant. Harrison has to take care of her, so he hasn't had time to come over. He's probably busy with paperwork. He loves me. He cried and begged me. But then the second day and the third day passed. The silence became terrifying. Not a single call. Not a single message. I dragged my battered body, one hand clutching my unhealed wound, the other leaning against the wall, and hobbled out into the hallway to borrow a phone to call Harrison. "The subscriber you have dialed is currently unavailable." The robotic, emotionless, automated voice repeated like a death sentence. I called my mother-in-law. Phone turned off. I called the family's private chauffeur. No answer. Fear began to suffocate me. I wasn't afraid they had abandoned me at that point. I was still too stupid to even consider that. I was afraid they had been in an accident. Maybe the car crashed on the way, taking Mom home. Maybe some tragedy had occurred, making the whole family vanish without a trace. I hobbled back to my room. My stomach was gnawing with hunger. For 3 days, I had only been on IV fluids. The other patients in the room all had family members feeding them soup, giving them milk, fanning them. I lay curled up in a corner, my lips cracked, my eyes sunken. By noon on the third day, an older orderly passing out charity meals stopped when she saw me facing the wall, sobbing quietly. "Hey there, why are you just lying there? Where's your family? Why hasn't anyone bought you food?" I turned around, tears streaming down my face. "I can't reach them. I don't have any money." The orderly looked at me with pity, sighed, and ladled a bowl of thin rice porridge from a massive plastic bucket. "Eat this to get your strength back." Poor thing. Such a pretty face. Just then, the duty nurse walked in to change bandages. Seeing this, she blurted out, her tone as sharp as a razor blade, "Just let her eat the charity soup." Her family signed her up for the absolute lowest tier, basic Medicare coverage room. When they did the intake for this ward, they specifically stated the patient would handle her own meals. They didn't even pay for the hospital cafeteria trays. The plastic spoon slipped from my hand, hitting the bowl with a clack. The blood in my veins turned to ice. "What did you say?" I stammered, my ears ringing. "The lowest tier? Handle my own meals?" "Yes," the nurse replied, without hiding a thing. "They only paid the bare minimum surgical fee and for this cheapest bed. I've worked here for 5 years, and I've never seen people drive up in luxury cars but act so incredibly stingy with an organ donor. Anyway, eat up so you can take your meds." Every word she said hit my head like a sledgehammer. It wasn't an accident. They weren't busy. They chose this. They chose to dump me in this cramped room. They chose to cut off contact. They chose to leave me the person who had just given up an organ to save their mother, relying on a charity bucket of watery porridge to survive. I looked down at the bland, thin porridge in my hands. My tears fell heavily into it, salty and bitter. I had donated a kidney. In return, I got a bowl of charity soup and ruthless abandonment. The physical pain from my incision suddenly faded, entirely eclipsed by the agony ripping through the left side of my chest. My naive faith was shattering, piece by piece. On the afternoon of the 4th day, I lay motionless on the bed, staring blankly at the peeling ceiling. I wasn't crying anymore. My tears had run dry. Or perhaps my survival instinct was kicking in, signaling that my time for weakness was over. Out in the hallway, the sound of leather dress shoes clicking against the tile floor echoed. Click, clack, click. I knew those footsteps. I had heard them every day for 2 years. That confident, arrogant rhythm was unmistakable. The hospital room door swung open. Light from the hallway poured in, casting a long shadow that fell directly over me. I held my breath, turning my head, clinging to the last, microscopic sliver of hope that Harrison would run over, hug me, and apologize for the delay. But no. The man standing there was indeed Harrison Sterling. But he brought no flowers, no food, and absolutely no remorse. He stood there, impeccably dressed in an expensive suit, and behind him loomed the shadow of a destruction I could never have anticipated. At that moment, I realized the hell of the past 4 days wasn't the whole story. It was merely the prelude to the final verdict they had prepared for me. Harrison walked in, but he wasn't alone. The cramped, sweat-scented space of the bottom-tier hospital room was suddenly invaded by the overpowering scent of expensive Le Labo Santal 33. The heady, woody fragrance I used to love now assaulted my nose, making me nauseous. He stood there, dapper in a custom-tailored Italian suit, a stark contrast to the baggy, wrinkled, slightly stained hospital gown I was wearing. He looked at me not with the eyes of a husband looking at a wife who had just survived a major surgery, but with the eyes of a businessman evaluating a piece of trash before tossing it into the dumpster. Behind him, the door opened wider. A nurse wheeled in a chair. Sitting in it was Eleanor. She still looked pale, an IV port still taped to her arm, but her eyes, the eyes that had looked at me with tearful begging just days ago, were now dry and as sharp as surgical scalpels. And next to her walked in a strange woman. Young, stylish, huge, gentle. Monster sunglasses covered half her face, but they couldn't hide her arrogant, bright red smirk. She wore a tight silk dress, her hand resting casually on a slightly bulging lower belly. I tried to sit up. The pain from my incision flared, forcing me to suck in a sharp breath of cold air. Harrison. "Mom," I gasped, my voice breaking from my dry throat. Is everyone okay?" The surgery. Before I could finish my sentence, a stack of white papers flew through the air, smacked directly into my chest, and scattered across the dirty hospital sheets. It wasn't a medical bill. It wasn't a letter. The bold letters at the top froze my blood completely. Petition for dissolution of marriage. "Sign it," Harrison opened his mouth. 2 short, cold words. No subject, no predicate, no emotion. Your job is done. I was paralyzed, my trembling hands picking up the paper. The ink was fresh, but the contents felt like they had been drafted 1,000 years ago. "Divorce?" I stammered, looking up at him, searching for even a sliver of remaining humanity. "What are you talking about, Harrison?" I just saved your mother. You promised. A giggle interrupted me. The young woman leisurely took off her sunglasses, revealing sharp, triumphant eyes. She took a step forward, wedging herself between me and Harrison, then deliberately thrust her hips forward so I could clearly see her pregnant belly. Hazel, let me introduce myself so you aren't confused, she said, her voice melodic but venomous. I am Tiffany Quinn, Harrison's fiancée. And this, she gently rubbed her belly, she is the first grandson and heir to the Sterling Empire. Did you really think Harrison needed a barren, dead tree like you for a wife? The Sterling family needs an heir, not a useless orphan. My ears rang. A barren tree. Useless. I turned to look at Eleanor, the woman sitting in the wheelchair, the woman I thought was currently carrying a piece of my own body. I waited for her to speak up and defend me, waited for the mother who promised to treat me like her own daughter to slap this mistress in the face. But Eleanor just adjusted the Hermes silk scarf around her neck, looking at me with absolute contempt mixed with disgust. As if I were a germ she wanted to scrub off the moment she left a sterile room. Thanks for the kidney, she said. Her voice was hoarse, but every word was deliberate and cruel. But let's be fair. That is the price you pay for leeching off my family and living in luxury for 2 years. Did you think donating a kidney meant you got to sit on my head? A daughter-in-law from the foster system, with no parents to teach her manners, how could you ever deserve to be the lady of the Greenwich estate? Mom. The word choked in my throat. Don't call me Mom, she snapped ruthlessly. It gives me goosebumps. Just consider it repaying your debt for being a parasite these last 2 years. Now the debt is settled. We go our separate ways. I looked at the 3 people in front of me. A treacherous husband, an ungrateful monster of a mother-in-law, and a shameless mistress. They stood there, forming a fortress of pure evil, blocking every path to life, every hope, and every ounce of trust I had left. I had traded my health and the wholeness of my body to save her. And now, while my surgical wound wasn't even closed, while the stitches were still fresh, they were throwing me out on the street like trash. Harrison stepped closer to the edge of the bed. He pulled a thick stack of cash from his suit pocket, crisp, green $100 bills. He slammed the money down onto the metal bedside table. The hollow smack sounded like a hammer driving a nail into a coffin. $10,000, he said, his tone like a god granting a favor. This is enough for you to rent a cheap apartment and scrape by for a few months. Take it and disappear from my life immediately. Don't make me call security to drag you out. You'd lose whatever face you have left. I looked at the $10,000. Was that the price they put on my kidney? Was that the price for 2 years of my youth acting as an unpaid maid? Was that the price for my blind love and stupid trust? Strangely, my tears did not fall. Perhaps the pain had surpassed the threshold my tear ducts could handle. My chest was utterly hollow. My heart felt as if it had been ripped out along with that kidney. I looked at Harrison. The handsome face I used to love passionately now looked bizarrely distorted and grotesque. He didn't look me in the eye. He stared at the divorce papers, tapping his finger impatiently against the page. Sign it quickly, I don't have a lot of time. Tiffany is tired and needs to go home and rest. He was worried about his tired mistress, while his wife, who had just been sliced open for his family, lay incapacitated in this filthy room. I reached my hand out, but not to take the pen. I wanted to rip that petition to shreds, throw the stack of cash in his face, and scream for the whole world to see the true faces of these demons. But my body was too weak. The physical trauma, combined with the mental shock, made my hands shake violently. I had no strength left. Tiffany scoffed, leaning down to whisper in my ear. Her overwhelming perfume made me want to gag. Hey Hazel, if you know what's good for you, take the cash and leave. You're already used goods. Don't humiliate yourself by trying to cling on. Humiliation. It was humiliating, yes, but not for me. For them. I looked directly into Harrison's eyes, a steady, naked gaze of pure hatred. I had never looked at him like that before. It used to only be submission and love. But now, in the depths of my eyes, the flame of vengeance sparked, incinerating the last remaining shreds of affection into ash. He thought he won. He thought with $10,000 and these divorce papers, he could shake me off like a cheap rag. He thrust the ballpoint pen toward me, pressing it into my freezing fingers. Sign, he ordered. I gripped the pen. The tip touched the paper. But at that exact second, the moment the very first drop of ink was about to permanently end the life of the old, stupid Hazel, the hospital room door burst open again. A powerful gust of wind rushed in, bringing with it an aura of authority and fury, stopping the pen right in my hand. This hell was not going to end here. The pen tip had barely grazed the paper, the ink not even setting, when the door flew open with such force that the hinges groaned loudly. A blast of cold air swept in not from the AC, but from the sheer presence of the people who just arrived. "Stop right there!" A voice boomed like thunder. It was Dr. Thomas Carter, the chief of surgery, the man who had personally operated on me. He marched in, his white coat billowing, followed by 4 massive, stern-faced hospital security guards. Harrison jumped. His hand, which was pressing down on mine, recoiled. He spun around, scowling in irritation, trying to regain the arrogant posture of an elite heir. "What the hell do you think you're doing, doctor? Can't you see we're dealing with private family matters? Who gave you permission to barge in here?" Dr. Carter didn't even glance at him. He walked briskly to the bed, swiped the divorce papers off the mattress and onto the floor, and rapidly checked the heart monitor that was beeping frantically next to me. "Family matters?" he growled, his eyes blazing as he stared dead at Harrison. "This is a hospital, not a flea market for you to haggle in. The patient just underwent major surgery. Her vital signs are unstable, and her incision is showing signs of infection due to severe neglect. Are you trying to kill her?" Harrison scoffed, adjusting his lapels, his tone haughty. "Watch your mouth, Doc. I'm the one paying the bills." He pointed at his mother in the wheelchair. "And my mother here just received my wife's kidney. We have the right to decide whether she stays or goes." The room plunged into absolute silence. A bizarre, taut silence, like a string about to snap. Dr. Carter looked at Harrison, then over at Eleanor. The corner of his mouth ticked up into a half-smile full of sheer mockery. He slowly took off his stethoscope and crossed his arms over his chest. "Received a kidney?" he repeated slowly, enunciating every syllable. "Who told you Eleanor Sterling received Miss Lane's kidney?" The 3 of them froze. Eleanor's eyes widened, her hands gripping the armrests of her wheelchair. Harrison frowned, a creeping sense of dread settling in. "What do you mean?" "My wife donated her kidney, and my mother was wheeled into the OR at the exact same time. It was obviously transplanted." "Miss Lane did donate her kidney," Dr. Carter said, his voice ice-cold. "But the transplant for Eleanor was canceled at the very last second, right on the operating table." He pulled a medical file from his pocket and threw it onto the metal nightstand, right next to the insulting $10,000 stack. "Your mother was discovered to have an acute hepatitis C infection and a severe blood clotting disorder right before they administered the anesthesia. If we had forced the transplant, she would have died on the table from anaphylactic shock and critical complications." Didn't the attending physician from the nephrology ward notify the family? Or were you all too busy abandoning your daughter-in-law to bother picking up your phones? The color entirely drained from Harrison's face. Eleanor trembled violently, her mouth opening and closing without a sound. It turned out their silence over the past few days wasn't just abandoning me, it was ignoring their own mother's medical updates. Tiffany, the pregnant mistress, was the first to scream, her shrill voice piercing the room. "If this old bag didn't get it, where did this bitch's kidney go? You cut it out. Did you doctors steal a kidney?" Dr. Carter looked at her with blatant disgust, then turned to me with a rare look of compassion. He signaled a nurse to hand Harrison a printed document. It was the exact consent form Harrison had forced me to sign before the surgery. The paper I hadn't read carefully. "You should reread Section 7, Clause 3, Dr. Carter said calmly. "The donor consents that if the designated recipient is medically unfit to receive the organ at the time of surgery, the hospital reserves the right to immediately reallocate the organ to the next highest priority patient on the National UNOS waiting list to prevent wastage. That is a strictly legal and ethical protocol." He paused for a beat, as if savoring the total collapse on the faces of these cruel people. Miss Lane's kidney was successfully transplanted that very night to a highly critical patient. "Who?" Harrison roared, sweat breaking out on his forehead. He vaguely realized he had just lost something far more valuable than his mother's life. He had lost a golden ticket. The hospital room door opened once more. This time, there was no yelling. A middle-aged man in a sharp black suit stepped in. He was tall, exuding an aura of immense, quiet power. He bowed respectfully to Dr. Carter, then walked straight to my bedside. This was the right-hand man of a figure that anyone doing business in New York feared and respected. "Good afternoon, Miss Hazel Lane," the man said, his voice polite but commanding. "I am the personal fixer for Mr. Arthur Vance." The name Arthur Vance dropped into the room like a nuclear bomb. Harrison stumbled backward, his legs hitting the bed frame, nearly falling over. Eleanor's face shifted from green to dead white. Arthur Vance, the billionaire chairman of Vanguard Real Estate Holdings, the godfather of the East Coast business world, a man who controlled thousands of acres of prime real estate and whose power could level empires. "Our chairman has been given a second chance at life thanks to your kidney," the fixer continued, completely ignoring the presence of the Sterling family. "He has passed the critical window and is recovering exceptionally well. He wishes to send his deepest gratitude to his savior." With that, he snapped his fingers. Two massive bodyguards walked in and effortlessly, gently lifted the entire hospital bed I was lying on. "We are moving Miss Lane to the presidential suite in the VIP pavilion. All nutritional, medical, and post-operative care expenses will be covered by Vanguard Holdings indefinitely. This is an order from the chairman." Harrison stood rooted to the spot. The horrifying reality had just hit him. He had forced his wife to give up an organ to save his mother, but his mother was still sick. And that kidney, that priceless gift, had fallen into the hands of a man his entire family wouldn't even dare dream of carrying shoes for. He had personally handed his wife, the savior of the real estate king, over to someone else, all in exchange for a signed divorce paper and a gold-digging mistress. As the gurney began to roll, the fixer turned to look at Harrison, his eyes lethal. "As for you people," the chairman left a message, "the hospital requires quiet. I suggest you leave the premises immediately, before we are forced to use extreme measures." But she's my wife," Harrison weakly protested, reaching out to grab the bed rail. A hulking bodyguard immediately stepped forward and swatted his hand away like a fly. Dr. Carter ordered the hospital security, "Throw them out. This family is permanently banned from my surgical ward." Lying on the gurney, I was wheeled right past them. I saw the absolute, crushing regret in Eleanor's eyes. Not regret for losing me, but regret for losing the ultimate goldmine of connections she had just thrown away. I saw the sheer panic in Tiffany's eyes as she realized my status had just flipped in the blink of an eye. And I saw Harrison, the man who just threw $10,000 in my face, now standing amidst the rubble of his own stupidity and greed. The stack of $100 bills still sat abandoned on the rusty metal table, cold, cheap, and pathetic, just like their character. The doors to the VIP elevator closed, sealing me off from that filthy world. The pain in my side was still there, but inside my chest, a new fire had been ignited. They had pushed me into hell, but they forgot that a phoenix only truly resurrects from the ashes. The doors of the VIP elevator closed, but it didn't take me to heaven. It took me to an entirely different world. A world of true power, where cruelty was wrapped in velvet, and revenge was calculated through cold, precise chess moves. I was moved to the presidential suite on the top floor. Gone was the noisy, chaotic racket of the public ward. Gone was the overpowering smell of bleach. The room was massive, filled with the scent of white lilies, with a panoramic view overlooking the glittering New York skyline at night. But I had no mind to enjoy it. I lay there, staring into space, waiting. The next morning, Mr. Arthur Vance came to see me personally. Unlike the fake aristocratic pretense of the Sterling family, this man radiated an oppressive aura of power, even while sitting in a recovery wheelchair. He was in his 60s, his white hair slicked back, his deep-set eyes hiding the sharpness of an old wolf who had spent his life surviving the cutthroat corporate world. "I owe you a life," he said, his voice raspy but clear. He didn't beat around the bush or get emotional. In the business world, financial debts are easy to pay. Debts of life are paid with your soul. From today, you are the adoptive daughter of Arthur Vance. In this city, anyone who touches you touches me. adoptive daughter. Once again, I was offered a family, but this time, there was no pathetic begging, no cheap exploitation, only the ironclad guarantee of a king. I looked at him, tears silently falling. Not out of being moved, but out of profound sorrow. Why did it take losing a piece of my own body to finally find someone to lean on? I don't want money, I replied, my voice hoarse. I just want justice. Vance laughed, a rare chuckle that smoothed the wrinkles on his forehead. Justice doesn't just happen naturally, my girl. You have to take it, and I will hand you the weapons. He gave a signal. His personal attorney, Mr. Hayes, a middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses, stepped forward and placed a thick stack of files on the table. Miss Lane, Attorney Hayes began, his tone strictly professional. Under the chairman's orders, I have audited the entire legal and financial portfolio connected to you, and I found something very interesting. He flipped open the file, pointing to a long list of real estate properties. 3 massive industrial parcels in New Jersey, 2 sprawling manufacturing plants in Pennsylvania, and a luxury unfinished condo in Brooklyn. All of these assets are legally titled under one single name, Hazel Lane. I was stunned. Those are the properties my ex-husband asked me to hold in name only. He said his company had bad debt, and he was afraid the IRS would seize them, so he transferred the deeds to me to diversify the risk. I just signed to help him. Attorney Hayes smirked, pushing up his glasses. And that was his fatal mistake. Harrison Sterling was too overconfident, or he underestimated you too much. He thought you were an obedient sheep who would never dare fight back. So, he executed perfectly legal transfers of ownership directly into your name, without ever requiring you to sign a power of attorney or a reversion clause. Vance chimed in, his voice thick with amusement. In other words, under U.S. law, those properties belong to you, 100% legally yours. He wanted to hide his money from the government, but he accidentally gifted you an entire empire for free. If he wants it back now, unless you voluntarily sign it over, I dare his entire bloodline to try and sue. The blood in my veins ran hot. I remembered Harrison's triumphant face when he threw that $10,000 at me. He thought he was so smart, he thought he could squeeze me dry and toss me aside. But he forgot that when he transferred those assets to my name to dodge his debts, he handed me the keys to his vault. So, what do you want to do? Vance asked, his eyes evaluating me. File for divorce immediately, split the assets, and throw him out on the street? I gripped the bedsheets, remembering Eleanor's look of disgust, Tiffany's pregnant belly, and that humiliating divorce petition. No, I said, my voice so cold it surprised even me. If I divorce him now, he'll know he lost everything. He'll go rabid and use every dirty trick in the book to force my hand. I want to make him pay, slowly. Vance nodded in satisfaction, slapping his hand hard on the armrest. Smart. You truly are my daughter. The cat and mouse game is always more entertaining. Let him think he's still in control. Let him sink deeper into debt, into his own delusions. I will bury this information, Attorney Hayes added. Hold off on signing the divorce papers. Legally, you are still married. These assets are your separate property because they were gifted to you, but his corporate debts remain his sole responsibility. We will tighten this noose slowly. In the days that followed, through Vance's intelligence network, I kept tabs on the situation with my in-laws. Exactly as predicted, hell had opened its doors for them. Because Eleanor didn't get the kidney, she had to undergo emergency dialysis at exorbitant prices at a private clinic, refusing to go to a public hospital out of sheer pride. Each session cost thousands of dollars, not to mention supplemental medications. The family's cash flow began to dry up. Tiffany, the precious new daughter-in-law, turned out to be a money-burning machine. She racked up endless bills for prenatal care, designer shopping sprees, and luxury spa days, forcing Harrison to siphon money from his company to keep her happy. He was running around frantically taking out high-interest, shady loans, firmly believing that the massive assets held in his wife's name were his ultimate safety net. He had no idea that his life preserver had just turned into an anvil, dragging him to the bottom of the ocean. The day I was discharged from the hospital, there was no one to pick me up except Arthur Vance's heavily armored motorcade. I didn't go back to the foster system, and I certainly didn't return to the Greenwich estate. The sleek, glossy black Maybach carried me across the Brooklyn Bridge, heading toward a private, gated compound in the Hamptons. Sitting in the car, I watched the city blur past the window. The image of Cinderella weak, enduring, submissive Hazel had died in that operating room. I touched the long scar on my side where my kidney used to be. It didn't hurt anymore. It was a reminder of the price of stupidity and the cost of power. Vance was right. I held the sword in my hands. Now, it was time to learn how to sharpen it until it was lethal. As the iron gates of the mansion closed behind me, I silently sent an unspoken declaration of war to the people gloating on the other side of the city. Go ahead and laugh. Enjoy your final days of peace. Because when I return, I won't just take back what's mine. I will take everything you desperately desire. The hunt had officially begun. The iron gates of the Hamptons estate closed, simultaneously slamming shut the door to my weak, pathetic past. Outsiders might look in and think I had won the lottery, rocketing to the top overnight after being adopted by Chairman Arthur Vance. They thought I would drown myself in silk, endless parties, and luxury vacations to compensate for a half-life of misery. They were wrong. Completely wrong. The past 6 months weren't heaven. They were hell. A literal crucible built by my adoptive father to burn away the naive, fragile girl from Queens and forge a new, cold, razor-sharp, unbreakable alloy. My days started at 4 a.m. While the entire city was still deep in sleep, I was already in the private gym. Grueling Pilates and yoga sessions stretched my body to its absolute limits. The surgical scar on my side where physical pain had once resided ached terribly, feeling like it would rip open all over again. There were times I collapsed on the mat, my sweat mixing with salty tears. But I didn't allow myself to stop. I knew this physical pain was nothing compared to the agony of being betrayed and discarded like expired meat in that hospital room. Afternoons were for numbers. Elite financial analysts, hired by Vance, taught me how to read financial statements, analyze market trends, and see right through money laundering and tax evasion schemes. My head spun with dry economic jargon. I swallowed the knowledge like bitter medicine. Because I understood. To destroy Harrison Sterling, I couldn't use tears. I had to use money and the rules of the high society game. Evenings were for etiquette. Straighten your back. Is that how you hold a wine glass? That's how a servant holds it. Sharpen your gaze. Stop looking down like a beaten dog. The strict reprimands of the etiquette coaches rang constantly in my ears. I had to learn how to walk, how to offer a social smile without revealing a hint of emotion, how to use silverware with aristocratic grace. I had to shed the insecure shell of an orphan and drape myself in the armor of a queen. The day I graduated from my training was the day I decided to change my appearance. I sat in front of the mirror, looking at my long, jet-black hair, the hair Harrison used to stroke, praising my gentle, traditional look. "Cut it off," I ordered the stylist. "Are you sure?" "It's beautiful," the stylist hesitated. "Cut it short and sharp. Leave absolutely no trace of attachment." The snip-snap of the scissors echoed. Long locks of hair fell to the floor like the remnants of my memories. When I looked up into the mirror, the woman staring back was a stranger. A sharp bob framed my face, accentuated by deep crimson lips and fiercely lined eyes. The Hazel of the past was dead. The woman looking at me in the mirror was someone else entirely, cold, detached, and ruthless. I walked out of the estate, no longer wearing cheap sweats or frumpy dresses. I wore a custom-tailored Saint Laurent suit, carried a Hermes Birkin, and my Louboutin stilettos clicked an authoritative rhythmic beat against the marble floor. Backed by Vance's massive financial empire, I registered and launched a venture capital firm, Phoenix Capital. The name said it all, rising from the ashes. The headquarters were located on the top floor of a Wall Street skyscraper, where I could look down at the entirety of New York City beneath my feet. While I was busy sharpening my claws, my prey was thrashing in a mud pit. The PI reports placed on my desk every morning painted a pathetic picture of the sterling textile empire. Thanks to my adoptive father's covert influence, longtime business partners, people terrified of the godfather of real estate, Arthur Vance had unanimously turned their backs on Harrison. Contracts were canceled. Banks froze their credit lines. Harrison was losing his mind. He ran around frantically, borrowing money from loan sharks, slowly selling off the supercars he used to proudly flex on Instagram. He even secretly tried to liquidate the manufacturing equipment in the Pennsylvania warehouses to get quick cash. A monumentally stupid move, because he forgot that, on paper, those warehouses belonged to me. He was committing the crime of selling someone else's assets without even realizing it. As for Tiffany, that greedy woman offered no help, only burning through the little money he had left on extravagant prenatal expenses and designer hauls, berating Harrison every single day. The happy home they stole from me was now drowning in screaming matches and the stench of financial ruin. It was time for me to pick up my pen and sign a luxurious, gold-embossed invitation. It was the ticket to Phoenix Capital's annual investment gala for New York's ultra-wealthy. Hand deliver this to CEO Harrison Sterling. I handed the invitation to my secretary. The corner of my mouth lifted into a smirk. Tell him. This is his final chance to save his company. I imagined him holding that invitation. He would be ecstatic. He would think luck was finally smiling at him again. He would wear his best suit, drag his pregnant mistress along, and walk into the tiger's den feeling like a hunter. He had no idea that the person waiting for him wasn't an angel investor. It was the Grim Reaper. And this Grim Reaper wore the face of the wife he had cheaply thrown away. The gala took place in a penthouse event space at Hudson Yards, where luxury literally touched the clouds. I stood on the private balcony, gently swirling a glass of red wine as dark as blood, looking down at the glittering city below. From this height, people looked as small as ants, and tonight, I was going to crush a few. At exactly 7 p.m., the prey arrived. Through the security camera feed streamed directly to my tablet, I saw Harrison walk into the hall. He tried to look composed, sharp in a jet-black suit, but his darting eyes and the beads of sweat on his forehead betrayed his absolute panic. He was banking on this party as his last life preserver. Walking next to him was Tiffany. Her 6-month pregnant belly made her walk waddle-like, yet she still squeezed herself into a tacky, skin-tight sequin dress. She was dripping in gold jewelry outdated pieces. I guessed were the last remaining heirlooms Eleanor had to sell off to fund her dialysis. They looked pathetically out of place among the elite executives, raising their glasses to one another. The stage lights dimmed, leaving a single spotlight shining in the center of the room. The soft classical music faded, replaced by the MC's formal voice. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the powerful woman behind Phoenix Capital, the visionary bringing billion-dollar opportunities to our enterprises tonight. CEO Hazel Lane. The grand doors opened. I stepped in. I was no longer the submissive Cinderella bowing her head. I wore a fiery red Versace evening gown with a high slit, flaunting my legs, and an aura of pure, unadulterated arrogance. Around my neck, a diamond necklace caught the light, practically blinding the room. The applause roared like thunder. I glided down the red carpet, my head held high, my eyes sweeping over the crowd until they locked exactly onto where Harrison was standing. He dropped his wine glass. The sound of shattering crystal was drowned out by the music, but I could clearly read his lips. Hazel. His face drained of all color, then flushed bright red. Not from shame, but from sheer greed. He looked at me the way a starving man looks at a feast. Instantly, the instinct of an absolute scumbag kicked in. He shoved Tiffany's hand off his arm, pushing her so hard she stumbled into a waiter. Ignoring his mistress, calling after him, he lunged toward me, pushing past the elegant guests. Hazel! Is it really you? He stood before me, his breath reeking of cheap alcohol and pure desperation. He reached out to grab my hand, but my bodyguard instantly blocked him with a lethal glare. I smiled. The perfect, manufactured, corporate smile I had practiced 1,000 times in the mirror. Hello, Harrison. Long time no see. My God, you look so different. I missed you so much it drove me crazy, he stammered, his eyes glued to the diamonds around my neck. I knew it. I knew you were a phoenix, destined for greatness. Tiffany. Tiffany was just a temporary mistake. She tricked me. I suppressed the urge to vomit. Just a few months ago, he called me a barren tree, a useless piece of trash. Now, smelling money, He was ready to trample over the mother of his unborn child. "Let's let bygones be bygones, Harrison," I said, my voice light, intentionally dropping a piece of poisoned bait. "I am a businesswoman. I only care about profit and the future. I heard your textile company is starved for capital." Harrison's eyes lit up. He swallowed hard. "Yes. Yes. Phoenix Capital is looking for partners, right? My company has a solid foundation. We just need some cash flow to keep the wheels turning. If you help me, we can get back together. I still love you so much, Hazel." I smirked, signaling him to follow me into a private VIP room, leaving Tiffany standing bewildered in the middle of the ballroom, surrounded by the disgusted stares of the elite. Inside the soundproof room, I placed a pre-drafted contract on the table. "Let's get straight to the point," I said, tapping my manicured nails against the oak table. "Phoenix Capital is ready to inject $2 million to save your company this week." Harrison's jaw dropped. $2 million. Enough to pay off his loan sharks, restart the assembly lines, and return to his life of luxury. His hands shook violently with joy, but I lowered my voice, my eyes turning icy. The golden rule of venture capital is that high risk requires massive collateral. What do you have? "You have warehouses. You have land," he rushed to say. "I don't trust empty words. I want you to use all your personal assets and company equity as collateral for this loan. Sign here. Commit to mortgaging all the real estate in New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and your company shares." He didn't hesitate for a second. His brain was completely clouded by the $2 million. Furthermore, he was absolutely convinced that those assets, the land and warehouses he had asked me to put in my name, were technically still his. He just had to get them back from me later. He thought I was still the same stupid, easily manipulated wife from before. He took the pen and eagerly signed the contract. His signature pressed deep and heavy into the paper. "Done." He looked up, grinning ear to ear. "Thank you, Hazel. I knew you still loved me. Let's go celebrate tonight." I pulled the contract back, carefully inspecting every signature. "You should head home first, Harrison. The funds will hit your account very soon." The moment his back disappeared behind the door, the smile on my face vanished. "Harrison Sterling, you just signed your own death warrant. You used assets that are legally registered under my name to secure a loan from my company. In legal terms, this act is called wire fraud and grand larceny by false pretense pledging assets you do not own. And for a sum of $2 million, the federal sentencing guidelines would throw the book at him." I looked down at the glittering city below. The trap had snapped shut. The beast was wounded. Now it was time to expose him to the light. The $2 million contract was signed, but it wasn't the life preserver Harrison imagined. It was a noose, and I had patiently tied every single knot. Now, it was time to kick the chair out from under him. 3 days after the gala, my private investigator dropped a dark brown file on my desk. "Miss Lane, things are even more interesting than you thought," he said, his tone dripping with disdain as he referred to the target. I opened the file. High-resolution photos spilled out. Tiffany was secretly meeting with a notorious, illegal sports betting mobster from Brooklyn. Her background check revealed she wasn't the high society heiress she claimed to be, but a high-end escort who specialized in hunting wealthy men. But the piece of paper that made me laugh out loud, a bitter, cynical laugh, was her medical report. The baby in her belly was 26 weeks along. I pulled up Harrison's old business travel itinerary, which I still had saved. During the exact window of conception, Harrison was on a 2-week trip in Europe, desperately hunting for contracts. The precious heir to the Sterling family was, in fact, a magnificent cuckolding scheme that Tiffany had smoothly slipped into their inheritance line. Harrison had abandoned his wife, forced her into surgery, all to bring home someone else's bastard and a gold-digging escort. I closed the file. I had enough ammunition. It was time to pull the trigger. I invited Harrison to dinner at a quiet, secluded waterfront restaurant in Williamsburg. He arrived early, ecstatic, ordering the most expensive bottle of wine. The first tranche of funds from Phoenix Capital had hit his company's account, reviving his arrogance. "Hazel, you truly are the goddess of my life." Harrison raised his glass, his face flushed with wine. "The company is up and running again. I'll get everything back soon. I smiled, discreetly turning on the recording app on the phone sitting in my purse under the table. What about your mother and Tiffany? I asked, my voice as light as a breeze. Harrison scoffed, waving his hand vulgarly. Oh, please, that old lady is a massive money pit. Tens of thousands a month for dialysis, and the doctors say she won't live long anyway. I'm planning to throw her in a cheap Medicaid nursing home out of sight, so I don't have to listen to her moan. As for Tiffany, he downed his wine, a ruthless glint in his eye. She's just an incubator. Once she pops the kid out, I'm doing a DNA test. If it's mine, I keep the kid and kick the bitch to the curb. I'm sick of her spending habits. I only love you and your ability to make money, Hazel. I looked at the man across from me. Every word he spoke acted like acid, burning away whatever microscopic trace of pity I might have had left. He didn't love anyone. He only loved himself. Do you mean that? I asked one last time. I swear on my life. He leaned forward and grabbed my hand. I pulled my hand back and stopped the recording. Thank you for dinner, Harrison. Remember everything you just said. I stood up and walked away, leaving him bewildered with the unpaid check. 3 months later, the day the first investment milestone contract expired, Harrison was sitting in his CEO office, his feet kicked up on the desk, daydreaming about phantom projects. The door burst open. It wasn't his secretary bringing tea. It was me, accompanied by the lead attorney for Phoenix Capital and 3 NYPD financial crimes detectives in full tactical gear. Harrison jumped up, the color draining from his face. Hazel? Officers? What is the meaning of this? I threw the audit files onto his desk. Harrison Sterling, you have severely breached the investment contract. The financial data you provided Phoenix Capital was forged. You misappropriated the funds to pay off personal loan sharks and gambling debts. And more importantly, a detective stepped forward, his voice like iron. We received a formal complaint charging you with wire fraud and grand larceny. Fraud? I used my own assets as collateral. Harrison screamed. Your assets? I stepped closer, looking dead into his eyes. Did you forget, Harrison? 2 years ago, you transferred all those lands and warehouses into my name to dodge your debts. Legally, they belonged to Hazel Lane. You had no power of attorney, yet you used them as collateral to borrow $2 million from my company. You sold what wasn't yours. That is fraud. The metallic click of handcuffs, locking around his wrists, echoed sharply. Harrison collapsed. He stared at me, stammering, You trapped me. I didn't trap you, I replied coldly. I merely gave you the freedom to exercise your greed, and you did not disappoint me. On the way to being booked, Harrison begged, crying, to see his mother one last time. Perhaps he sensed something terrible was coming, or perhaps it was a final shred of humanity, or just wanting to play his victim role to the end. The detectives agreed to swing by the hospital. The scene at the VIP hospital room was pure chaos. Tiffany was ransacking the bedside drawer. She was stuffing rings, necklaces, and earrings, Eleanor's precious heirloom jewelry into her fake Dior bag. Eleanor lay weakly on the bed, raising a trembling hand to stop her, but it was useless. What the hell are you doing? Harrison roared, lunging forward even in handcuffs. Tiffany jumped, dropping a jade bracelet that shattered onto the floor. Seeing Harrison in handcuffs, she knew the ship was sinking. She bared her fangs. I'm taking my compensation for my wasted youth. This family is ruined. You're going to prison, and I need to survive. I walked in and slowly picked up a shard of the broken jade. Wasted youth? I smirked. I pulled the DNA test results and the photos of her cheating with the mobster from my bag. I threw them into the air. The photos rained down like confetti, landing at Harrison and Eleanor's feet. Take a good look, Harrison. When she conceived, you were in Germany. The baby in her belly carries the DNA of a sports betting kingpin. There isn't a single drop of Sterling blood in there. Harrison stared at the DNA test. The bold words, 0% probability of paternity, slammed into his retinas. He let out an agonized roar, like a wounded animal, and lunged at Tiffany, but the cops yanked him back. Tiffany turned pale white. At that exact moment, 2 FBI agents walked into the room. Tiffany Quinn. You are under arrest for grand larceny and involvement in an illegal interstate gambling syndicate. The second pair of handcuffs clicked shut. The two villains stood handcuffed side by side. One who defrauded his wife, one who defrauded her lover. Eleanor lay on the bed, witnessing everything. Her eyes rolled back, her breathing ragged. She looked at her criminal son, looked at her scammer almost daughter-in-law, and then looked at me. The daughter-in-law she had driven away was now standing there elegant, powerful, and coldly passing judgment. The hospital room was suffocating with the stench of rot and karma. I stood amidst the ruins, feeling no triumph. I only felt a strange, hollow emptiness. It was all over, but there was still one final debt of family love that required a closing statement. The air in the room grew thick. The only sounds were Harrison's heavy panting, Tiffany's hysterical crying, and the rhythmic pumping of Eleanor's ventilator. The two scammers were in cuffs, but this play needed one final note before the curtain closed. I slowly pulled my phone from my purse. "Mom," I called out to Eleanor. Calling her mom one last time tasted incredibly bitter. She had spent her entire life scheming to protect her son's wealth. She despised me for being poor. She threw me out after I donated a piece of my body. So now, she needed to hear exactly what her precious, fragile son planned to do with her. I pressed play. Harrison's voice played loudly, clear, sharp, and ruthless, slicing through the quiet room. "That old lady is a massive money pit, tens of thousands a month for dialysis. I'm planning to throw her in a cheap Medicaid nursing home out of sight, so I don't have to listen to her moan." The entire room froze. Harrison screamed, trying to lunge at me. "Turn it off. Turn it off." "Mom!" I was drunk. I was drunk when I said that. But that belated excuse couldn't erase the naked truth. Eleanor's cloudy eyes widened, staring dead at her only son. She had enabled him, conspired with him to deceive me, and trampled over the woman who saved her life, all to preserve the Sterling Empire for him. And in the end, in his eyes, she was nothing but a burden, a debt to be discarded. A single tear rolled down from her wrinkled eye, dropping onto her pillow. Was it a tear of delayed regret, or absolute despair, realizing her entire life had been a losing gamble? She turned her head to look at me. In her eyes, there was no more contempt, no more aristocratic arrogance. There was only begging, agony, and an apology that she could no longer speak. Suddenly, her body convulsed. She clutched her left chest, her mouth falling open as her breaths became shallow. The heart monitor let out a long, monotonous beep, the sound of the end. Doctors and nurses rushed in to resuscitate her. But I knew no medicine could save a heart that had been shattered by the betrayal of its own flesh and blood. Eleanor Sterling died of a massive myocardial infarction, taking her suffocating resentment to the grave. Harrison wailed, dropping to his knees on the floor, his handcuffed hands slamming helplessly against the bed frame. I stood there, watching the white sheet being pulled over the face of the woman who had been the nightmare of my life. I didn't feel happy, nor did I feel sad. I just felt relieved. The final binding thread had been severed. 3 months later, the federal trial for Harrison Sterling and his accomplices took place. Faced with a mountain of ironclad evidence, wire fraud, grand larceny, document forgery, tax evasion, Harrison was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. Tiffany Quinn, charged with grand larceny and racketeering with an illegal gambling ring, received 7 years. The baby she gave birth to was placed into the foster care system, as its biological father, the betting kingpin, was also swept up by the FBI. The Sterling textile empire officially collapsed. I kept my promise to myself. I didn't keep a single thing from those filthy ashes. As the legal owner, I liquidated all the land in New Jersey, the factories in Pennsylvania, and the company's shares. I sold everything at market value, raking in tens of millions of dollars. I didn't use that money to buy mansions or supercars. I used it to establish a charitable foundation called Sunflower Haven. The foundation provides full-ride college scholarships for ambitious foster kids and covers surgical costs for impoverished dialysis patients who don't have insurance. I wanted to ensure that no one would ever have to sell their dignity or their own body parts just because they were poor and alone like I once was. A year later, The family cemetery in upstate New York was bathed in golden sunlight. The wind whistled through the green pine trees. I stood before my biological parents' graves, placing a bouquet of pure white lilies on the stone. "Mom, Dad," I whispered, my fingers gently tracing their engraved names. "Your daughter is back. I'm no longer a weak child who only knows how to cry." I lived, and I lived very well. I reached through my silk blouse and gently touched the scar on my side. The keloid scar had hardened over time. It didn't hurt anymore. Now, it felt like a medal, proving that I had walked through hell and returned intact, stronger than ever before. I had paid my debts of gratitude and vengeance to the past. My heart was now as clear as the blue sky above. No more resentment, no more torment, just peace. "Hello, my phoenix." A deep, warm voice spoke from behind me. I turned around. Dr. Thomas Carter was standing there beneath the shade of an oak tree. He wasn't wearing his white coat, and he no longer had the strict, frowning demeanor of the chief surgeon from that hospital room a year ago. He wore a simple white button-down, holding a bouquet of white lilies, the flower, symbolizing rebirth and hope. He had been by my side for the past year. Not loud, not aggressive. He patiently listened to my nightmares, quietly helped me run my charity foundation, and taught me how to trust people again. "Did you wait long?" I smiled, the most radiant smile I had ever given. "I could wait a lifetime. What's a few minutes?" he replied, his eyes as gentle as autumn water. He stepped forward, laid the flowers next to my parents' grave, then turned and took my hand. His hand was warm and sturdy, wrapping around my hands that had weathered so many storms. "Let's go," he said. "The sun is getting high." "Yeah. Let's go." Together, we walked down the white gravel path. The brilliant New York sun draped over our shoulders, warming the wounds that had finally closed. Behind me was a past resting in peace. Before my eyes was a brilliant new dawn. Hazel the orphan was gone, and the phoenix had truly taken flight. Hazel's story is a profound warning. Never sacrifice your dignity or your health to beg for love from others. Blind sacrifice does not create gratitude. It only feeds greed and contempt. When pushed into the abyss, do not choose to collapse. Turn your pain into power. Turn your silence into a weapon. Modern women do not need to wait for a prince to save them. Take the wheel of your own life, achieve financial independence, and be as resilient as a phoenix rising from the ashes. True happiness only comes when you know how to value and protect yourself. Now, if you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which part surprised you the most. Every subscription and comment is a massive motivation for us to continue sharing meaningful stories in life. Thank you so much.